All I wanted was to paint my front door navy blue, but that simple request uncovered forged documents, fake signatures, and ended with the HOA president being arrested in court. This isn't just a petty neighborhood feud. It's a full-blown criminal case. I thought painting my door would add charm. I didn't know it would start a war. I had no idea a gallon of navy blue paint could unleash hell. It all started on an unusually bright Tuesday morning in early spring, the kind where the breeze carries the smell of budding flowers, and you think, maybe things are finally settling down. My name is Alan Pierce. I've lived in Oakwood Estates for 6 years, long enough to know that everyone mows their lawn on Saturdays, no one parks on the street overnight, and Karen Wilkins always gets her way. Oakwood looks like something out of a catalog. Rows of neatly trimmed hedges, white picket fences, and cul-de-sacs named after trees, Maple Ridge, Willow Hollow, Birch Bend. It was quiet, predictable, almost painfully perfect, and I liked it that way. But perfection has a cost. I just wrapped up some long overdue landscaping, laid down fresh mulch, pruned the rose bushes I never asked for but inherited with a house, and was finally ready for the last piece, painting the front door. The old maroon color had faded into a sad, rust-colored brown. It looked like dried blood and bad decisions. It was time for a change. I wasn't about to go rogue. Oakwood Estates was governed by a notoriously strict homeowners association, HOA for short, and while most residents just quietly obeyed, I wasn't one to blindly follow rules that didn't make sense. Still, I wanted to stay within bounds. So I did what any responsible homeowner would do. I checked the HOA guidelines. The rules were tucked away in a binder the HOA had mailed when I moved in. They were written in legalese, printed on gray recycled paper that smelled like a tax office. Buried between lawn height regulations and holiday light duration limits was the section on exterior home colors. Front doors must be painted in tasteful, subdued hues that complement the home's aesthetic. That was it. No list of forbidden colors. No swatches. No diagrams, just a vague statement on taste and compliments. I even double-checked online, but there was nothing more specific. My shutters were already navy, and I thought it would look cohesive, elegant, even. So I took a trip to the local hardware store, picked out a classic deep navy called Midnight Anchor, and submitted my official exterior modification request with printed color samples as required. I didn't think twice about it. That was my first mistake. 3 days later, the storm hit, and its name was Karen. I was sipping my morning coffee, scrolling through emails when I saw the subject line. Violation notice. Unauthorized color selection. All caps. No greeting. Just fire and brimstone. The sender? Karen Wilkins, president of the Oakwood Estates HOA. Her message read like a court summons, peppered with phrases like aesthetic disruption, noncompliance, and disciplinary action. According to Karen, my chosen navy blue was excessively bold, unsuitable for community image, and in direct violation of approved HOA color schemes. Attached was a scanned, approved color list I'd never seen before, 6 boxes of colors that all looked like different shades of oatmeal and regret. Beige, lighter beige, eggshell gray, misty bone. Nothing darker than shadow on a cloudy day. There was no mention of this list in the official handbook. No record online. No mailing. No vote. Nothing. I stared at the screen, rereading the email in disbelief. This wasn't about paint. This was about power. And I had just challenged hers. I didn't respond right away. I did my homework. That same afternoon, I reviewed every document I had. Nothing mentioned a specific color restriction. I even called my neighbor Linda, a longtime resident and former secretary on the HOA board. Karen's color list? She laughed. That's not official. She came up with that on her own a few years ago and started enforcing it like it was law. Everyone just goes along because they don't want to deal with her. But it's not in the actual rules, I clarified. Not that I've ever seen. That was all I needed to hear. I wrote a polite but firm response, pointing out the lack of color specificity in the official guidelines and questioning the validity of Karen's approved list. I hit send. 10 minutes later, she replied, "The board reserves discretionary authority over all aesthetic matters." Your request is denied. No greeting. No signature. Just Karen, wielding invisible rules like a weapon. And that's when I decided I wasn't backing down. I submitted a request for a formal HOA hearing per the dispute resolution process buried in the bylaws. Karen didn't respond directly. Instead, I got a form email stating the hearing had been postponed due to scheduling conflicts. It was rescheduled, then postponed again. Meanwhile, my door remained untouched. I began to notice Karen's SUV slowing down every time she passed my house. She'd glare at the unpainted door like it had insulted her personally. I told myself I was imagining things, until I wasn't. One morning, I found a small manila envelope taped to my front door. Inside, printed photos of my house from multiple angles, with notes scrawled in red ink like a serial killer's manifesto. Unapproved garden stone border, see page 14. Excessive mailbox decoration. Trash bins visible at 10:04 a.m. None of it was real. My garden stones had been there for years. My mailbox had one tiny flag, and my trash bins were always hidden behind the gate. But the message was clear. Back off, or Karen would make my life hell. Then came the Whisper Network. Neighbors started pulling me aside during dog walks. Be careful. Karen doesn't like being challenged, said Tom from 2 doors down. She tried to fine us $300 for a wind chime once, said Eliza from the cul-de-sac. She took pictures of my daughter's chalk art and filed complaint. Whispered a woman I barely knew. Called it graffiti. It was like living under suburban dictatorship, and all of it over a door. But the thing about bullies is they push just hard enough to see if you'll fold. If you do, they own you. If you don't, well, that's when things get interesting. The paint hadn't even touched the door yet, but the war had begun. I didn't know it then, but what started with a paint request would spiral into forged documents, a courtroom spectacle, and handcuffs. I just want to paint my damn door. But Karen Wilkins had built her little HOA kingdom brick by brick, and I had just kicked one loose. And kingdoms built on control? They don't fall quietly. Karen Wilkins, the tyrannical HOA president of Oakwood Estates, had denied my paint request for a navy blue door, citing mysterious aesthetic guidelines that didn't exist in any official HOA documentation. I requested a formal hearing. She postponed it twice, but the real danger wasn't the delay. It was what she brought with her when the hearing finally happened. She walked into the room like a judge, jury, and executioner. It was a muggy Thursday evening when the HOA hearing finally took place. Held in the Oakwood Community Center, a renovated 2-room space that usually smelled like disinfectant and weak coffee. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, humming like something alive. The folding chairs were arranged in a neat semicircle, like we were about to perform a play. And I suppose, in some ways, we were. Karen sat at the head of the room, flanked by 3 other board members who looked like they'd rather be anywhere else. Their smiles were thin, tired, practiced. I entered carrying my neatly organized folder of evidence, color samples, printed HOA covenants, and my email correspondence with Karen. I nodded politely. Karen didn't return it. She was already flipping through a manila folder, as if she were preparing for a criminal trial. Let's proceed, she said briskly. No welcome, no preamble. She held up a sheaf of papers. As you'll see here, Exhibit A, an amended bylaw passed in 2018. Clearly prohibits any bright or non-neutral front door colors that fall outside the Oakwood standard palette. The room went quiet. I leaned forward, studying the document she was passing out. Something felt off. The page with the color restrictions looked fresh, too fresh, white and crisp like it had just come off a printer. The rest of the pages looked like they'd spent time in a dusty filing cabinet. The font changed halfway through the document. A different header appeared at the top of page 3. I glanced up at the other board members. None of them met my eyes. It wasn't just shady, it was orchestrated. Karen smiled like she just placed the final piece in a chess match. This amendment was approved in April of 2018, unanimously passed by the board under previous leadership. It has been in effect ever since. I slid the documents back across the table without touching them. I'd like to see a copy of the minutes from that board meeting, I said calmly. Karen's eyes flickered. Just for a moment. Minutes are archived. You're welcome to submit a formal request to review them. I turned to the board members. Is that true? Did this amendment actually pass? Only one of them spoke. We defer to the president on documentation matters. She's very thorough. That word again. Thorough. It had the same taste as untouchable. Then I'll submit that request, I said. And in the meantime, I'd like to request a pause in enforcement until verification is provided. Karen raised an eyebrow. Your request has been heard and denied. The meeting adjourned. As I left the room, one of the board members, a guy named Rick, avoided my gaze and muttered under his breath, "Don't make this harder on yourself, Alan." But I wasn't the one making it hard. I was just trying to paint a door. I went home that night and opened my laptop with a different kind of purpose. This wasn't about paint anymore. This was about power, manipulation, and Karen's homemade rulebook. I searched my records again, every PDF, every HOA mailing, every shred of paper I had received over the last 6 years. No mention of the 2018 amendment. No Oakwood standard palette. No vote announcements. Nothing. So I made a call. "Hey, this is Alan Pierce. I'm hoping you can help me with something weird." The voice on the other end of the line was gravelly and cheerful. "Alan? Of course. How are things back in Oakwood?" It was Stephen McAllister, the former HOA president, retired and living the good life in Sarasota, Florida. He'd run the HOA before Karen took over, before the neighborhood politics turned nasty. "I have a question," I said. "Do you remember an amendment passed in April 2018 that restricted front door colors?" There was a pause, then a laugh. "Front door colors? No, we specifically avoided that mess. We tried to come up with a palette once, but it turned into a shouting match about taupe versus grayish. We left it vague on purpose." Karen claims an amendment was passed during your tenure. Another pause. A heavier one. "Alan, I can promise you with 100% certainty that no such amendment passed while I was in charge. If she's saying otherwise, something's wrong." Wrong was an understatement. It was fraud. The next morning, I drove to the county records office, a squat brick building with flickering lights and coffee-stained counters. Every official HOA amendment was required to be filed with the county clerk. It was public record. Tampering with it was a crime. I requested the Oakwood Estates HOA filings from 2017 through 2020. The clerk brought them out, 5 manila folders bound in red string. I flipped through each one. Nothing. No amendment about color palettes. No April 2018 document. No vote records. No Karen Wilkins anywhere near anything about front doors. What I did find was the original HOA covenant document, dated 2012, with the exact language I'd cited from the beginning. Exterior colors must be tasteful and complementary to the home's overall aesthetic. No additional restrictions. I took photos, scanned copies, made backups. If Karen had fabricated a rule and passed it off as law, this was bigger than HOA politics. This was a paper trail to her door, and I intended to follow it all the way there. But Karen wasn't done. She was just getting started. I returned home and wrote a formal letter to the HOA board, citing my findings. No official amendment existed. No county record showed any vote. Former president denied any knowledge of it. I requested a written response from the board within 7 days to explain the discrepancy. 3 days later, I got my answer. But it didn't come in the form of a letter. It came in a bright green certified envelope, stamped with the HOA seal. Inside were 7 pages of printed violation notices and a fine totaling $900. The violations? Improper garbage bin placement, unauthorized use of garden border stones, excessive seasonal decor April, failure to comply with aesthetic standards. Each citation was dated in the past 2 weeks, the same 2 weeks I've been pushing back. It wasn't just retaliation. It was sabotage. The garbage bins were always stored behind a locked side gate. The garden border stones had been in place for years. And seasonal decor? I hadn't even put up an Easter wreath. Karen had weaponized the violation process to silence me. I wasn't afraid. I was furious. I spent the next day documenting everything. I took timestamp photos, recorded video footage, even spoke to a few neighbors who confirmed they hadn't noticed anything unusual. Karen wasn't just pushing me into compliance. She was pushing me towards something worse. But what she didn't know is that I'd already decided I wasn't backing down. Not this time. I was staring at a $900 fine over fake violations and a forbidden paint color that wasn't even against the rules. But the real crime wasn't the money. It was the document she presented at that hearing. And the cracks in her kingdom were starting to show. I didn't know how far she'd go yet, but I was about to find out, because next, she'd fake a legal document. And that would be her fatal mistake. Karen Wilkins, the manipulative HOA president of Oakwood Estates, had tried to enforce a forged bylaw to prevent me from painting my front door navy blue. When I exposed a fake document and filed a formal request for clarification, she retaliated with $900 in fabricated violation fines. But I wasn't backing down, and she wasn't done escalating. When people start to lose control, they get reckless. Karen was no exception. The green violation envelope still sat on my kitchen table like a warning flare. The fine total scrawled across the top in angry red ink, $900. I'd photographed, documented, and discredited every alleged offense. But Karen wasn't after truth. She was after submission. And when I didn't fold, she made her next move. 3 days after I submitted my appeal against the fines, a white envelope appeared in my mailbox. This one wasn't from the HOA. It was from the county court. Inside was a notice. Karen filed an injunction against me. The HOA president is accusing you of harassment, intimidation, and disruption of board operations. That's what the notice read. The hearing date was set for 2 weeks out. At first, I laughed. A dry, disbelieving kind of laugh. The kind you do when something is too ridiculous to take seriously. But that laughter died as I flipped to the second page. Attached were 3 affidavits, formal statements allegedly from my neighbors, the Johnsons, who lived next door. The documents were notarized and included claims that I had harassed board members, installed unauthorized structures, and verbally threatened HOA officials. It didn't make sense. The Johnsons had been gone. They left for Europe almost a month ago for a Mediterranean cruise they'd been planning for years. I even helped collect their mail while they were gone. There was no way they had signed anything, let alone filed legal affidavits. That was the moment the line got crossed. Karen had gone from petty tyrant to full-on felon. I grabbed my phone and called Mark Johnson. He answered on the second ring. "Alan? What's up?" "Hey, quick question. Did you and Diane sign any kind of affidavit about me for the HOA?" Silence. Then laughter. "Wait, what?" "No, we just got back 2 days ago." "Why?" I explained everything. The hearing, the documents, their supposed signatures. Mark was stunned. "We didn't sign anything. We weren't even in the country when you're saying this was filed. That's not just a mix-up, Alan. That's a serious accusation." "I know," I said, "and it's the proof I need." I'd seen enough. This wasn't HOA drama anymore. This was criminal. I scanned the affidavits and forwarded them to the Johnsons. Mark confirmed. The signatures were theirs, but not from anything recent. They'd signed similar forms for HOA membership years ago. It looked like someone had reused them, cut and pasted onto new statements. Sloppy. Desperate, Karen had taken this fight to the legal arena, but she brought forged weapons. And now it was time to call in backup. Her name was Julia Brenner, and she wasn't afraid of people like Karen. I found Julia online. She was a local attorney who specialized in HOA disputes and neighborhood governance fraud, something I didn't even know existed until I needed it. We met in her office, a modest suite above a law firm downtown. She flipped through my stack of evidence without a word. Emails, violation notices, bylaws, the fake amendment, the court summons, the affidavits. Then she looked up, eyes sharp. "This isn't an HOA issue anymore," she said. "This is document falsification, signature forgery, abuse of power, and perjury. You've got her dead to rights. What's the next move?" I asked, We filed a countersuit. Immediately, we weren't just going to defend ourselves. We were going to take Karen down. That same day, Julia drafted the paperwork. We filed a civil countersuit against both Karen Wilkins and the HOA, citing document tampering, forged affidavits, retaliatory abuse of power, defamation, harassment. We requested an emergency hearing to present the evidence before Karen's injunction hearing could proceed. The request was granted. Our judge, the Honorable Marcus Rivera, known in the community for his no-nonsense approach to HOA-related abuse cases. He had a reputation for cutting through petty drama and zeroing in on the truth. The hearing was scheduled for the following Friday. 1 week to prepare. You don't need to fight dirty when the truth is this sharp. During that week, Julia and I gathered everything. County records showing no amended bylaw existed. Statements from the former HOA president, Stephen McAllister. The Johnsons' sworn affidavits stating they never signed the HOA documents in question. Travel records proving they were overseas. Forensic analysis that began confirming digital alterations in the documents. Karen had pulled one forgery too many, and she was about to walk into a courtroom where truth will be the sharpest blade in the room. But Karen didn't show up scared. She showed up smug. Friday morning arrived like thunder. The courthouse was cold, sterile. Rows of wooden pews lined the small courtroom. The air buzzed with tension and the faint smell of lemon cleaner. Karen entered wearing a tailored navy blue blazer that made the irony almost poetic. She walked like she was the queen of Oakwood, untouchable. Beside her stood a man in a tailored suit and Italian leather shoes, her attorney, probably charging more per hour than most people made in a day. He smirked when he saw me. That smirk faded the moment he noticed the folders Julia carried. Then Judge Rivera entered. He took a seat at the bench and immediately asked both parties to approach. No introductions, no fluff, just steel-eyed focus. Mr. Pierce, Ms. Brenner, he said, "You've requested this emergency hearing to address allegations of document tampering. I'll hear your evidence now." And that was when we unloaded the truth. Julia laid it out like a surgeon opening an incision. Precise, clean, lethal. First, the original HOA covenant. Then the county records confirming no such amendment had been filed. Next, Steve McAllister's letter, confirming no color rule had ever passed under his tenure. Then the bombshell, the Johnsons' affidavits, video statements, and boarding passes from their crews, confirming they weren't even in the U.S. when the signatures were dated. Karen began shifting in her seat. Her attorney tried to object. Judge Rivera waved him down. Then Julia produced a final blow. Preliminary forensic findings indicating the affidavits contained digitally pasted signatures, copied from older HOA forms. Digital layering confirms the Johnson signatures were not originally applied to these documents, Julia said. They were lifted and inserted electronically. What's more, Karen Wilkins submitted them as part of a legal injunction. The judge turned to Karen. "Ms. Wilkins," he said, "do you have a response to these allegations?" Karen cleared her throat. Her confidence slipped just an inch. I received the documents by email," she said. "I printed them for the court. That's all." Judge Rivera didn't blink. "Show me the emails, please." Karen fumbled with her phone. Her attorney whispered urgently. She tapped, scrolled, stalled. "I can't find them at the moment," she muttered. That was when the judge ordered a full forensic investigation. And Karen's carefully built world, one fake rule, one forged paper at a time, began to crumble. Karen Wilkins submitted forged affidavits and a fake HOA bylaw in an attempt to block me from painting my front door navy blue. My attorney exposed the fraud in an emergency hearing. Judge Rivera, unimpressed and increasingly suspicious, ordered a full forensic investigation of the documents. Karen's confidence began to crumble, but the storm hadn't even landed yet. When a queen falls, the silence of her court is louder than her scream. Court adjourned with a gravity that felt heavier than the gavel. Karen gathered her things quietly. Her attorney said nothing as they left. No smug smiles. No parting glances. The way they retreated said everything. The kingdom had been wounded, and its ruler felt it. Julia and I walked out of the courthouse with fire in our steps. But this wasn't over. Not even close. What we didn't realize was that Karen's world was already bleeding out behind the scenes. The very next morning, I received an anonymous envelope. No return address. Just one word typed in all caps across the top. Truth. Inside were photocopies, grainy but legible, of meeting minutes from an HOA session that Karen claimed had happened in 2018, the one where the infamous paint color amendment had allegedly been passed. But there was something off about them. The headers didn't match other HOA documents I had. The names of board members listed at the top included someone who had moved away before 2018. One of them, Marie W., had died in 2017. A watermark was dated 2020. Someone had gone to a lot of trouble to fake history, but hadn't paid enough attention to get it right. There was no doubt in my mind who had created this phantom document trail. What was most interesting, though, wasn't the content. It was the implication. Someone on the inside had turned. Karen's grip was slipping, and the silence around her was starting to scream. I went door to door, quietly. Rick Daniels, one of the HOA board members who'd sat beside Karen during the hearing, was the first to open up. He didn't let me inside, didn't even step out past his doorframe. But his eyes said everything. I didn't sign anything, he said quietly. None of us did. That document, I've never seen it until the night of your hearing. Why didn't you speak up? He looked down at the concrete. Karen told us she had the authority, that everything was already approved and filed. She said she'd handle it. She forged the documents. Rick, I know that now. You need to tell the judge. His face tensed. She's got dirt on a few people. Threats. Photos. Things from years ago when people cut corners during neighborhood projects. That's how she controls the board. Blackmail. Karen hadn't built her throne on loyalty. She'd built it on fear. But fear is brittle. It doesn't bend. It snaps. Later that evening, Julia received an email from a second board member, encrypted and signed. It contained a PDF of HOA emails, internal correspondence between Karen and the rest of the board. In one, dated just a week before the hearing, Karen wrote, "This entire thing needs to be shut down before the paint hits the brush. If we don't enforce control, we lose it. Use the fines. Use the injunction. He's testing us." Another line chilled me to the bone. If the documents aren't enough, we make them enough. It was the digital equivalent of blood on her hands. There comes a point in every cover-up where the lies are louder than the truth. Karen had crossed that point. The forensic results came in 3 days later. The court-appointed document examiner's report read like a crime novel. The alleged 2018 amendment, printed on paper manufactured in 2022. Font inconsistency traced back to 2 different word processing programs. The signature pages, scanned and layered. The neighbor affidavits, signatures lifted from old HOA forms and digitally pasted. Matching pixels, matched pressure patterns, exact stroke overlays. It wasn't just amateur forgery. It was clumsy, lazy, built on arrogance. The examiner concluded the documents were intentionally altered with the purpose of misrepresenting authenticity to a legal body. That phrase hit like a punch to the chest. Karen hadn't just committed fraud. She committed fraud against the court. The moment that broke her wasn't loud. It was silent, and it came from the people she thought would always stay quiet. The judge called a second emergency hearing to present the findings. The board was summoned as witnesses. This time, they didn't sit beside Karen. They sat on the opposite bench. Karen entered last. Alone. No attorney. Her blazer wrinkled. Her face pale. The courtroom air, once thick with her confidence, now carried only tension and the scent of decay. Judge Rivera began the session without ceremony. He held up the forensics report. "I have reviewed the findings. Ms. Wilkins, you submitted forged documents and affidavits to this court. Do you have any defense?" Karen didn't speak. Rick Daniels stood. "I do, Your Honor." He looked at Karen, not with hatred, but with the kind of emptiness reserved for someone you once respected. "I was on the board. I didn't approve any amendment. Karen told us it had been passed. She told us not to ask questions. She used fear to silence us." Judge Rivera nodded, turning to the others. One by one, each board member stood and confirmed Rick's statement. Karen didn't move. Her world was collapsing around her, one silent confession at a time. When power crumbles, the fall is deafening, even if it starts in whispers. I sat there, still as stone, as the judge gathered the evidence together like weights on a scale. Then came the moment no one could have predicted. Ms. Wilkins, Judge Rivera said, "This court takes a very dim view of falsified documentation, abuse of office, and fraudulent representation of community authority. I am referring this case to the district attorney's office for immediate criminal investigation." The gavel came down with a crack that echoed like thunder. Karen flinched. She didn't cry. Not yet. That would come later. When the bailiff stepped forward to escort her out of the courtroom, she finally spoke. This isn't over. But it was. The board was dismissed, the injunction lifted, the fines voided. The judge turned to me. "You may paint your door," he said, "any color you like, as long as it falls under the actual guidelines, not ones made up by a person playing queen." I smiled. "Midnight anchor, Your Honor. Navy blue." He nodded once. A rare smile. "Good choice." And as Karen disappeared behind a courthouse door, her kingdom gone, her lies exposed, I finally felt something I hadn't felt in weeks. Freedom. Karen Wilkins' forged documents were exposed in court. The board turned against her. Judge Rivera referred her for criminal prosecution. But power doesn't give up easily, and Karen wasn't done fighting. Her most desperate act was still to come. You'd think after being exposed in court, she'd retreat. But people drunk on power don't go quietly, they go scorched earth. 2 days after Judge Rivera referred Karen's case to the district attorney, I thought the storm was over. I slept better. The air felt lighter. I even taped off my front door, ready to paint it navy blue that weekend. Then came the knock. It was subtle. 2 soft taps. Too casual for a neighbor. Too deliberate for a delivery. I opened the door to find a woman in a navy suit holding a clipboard. "Mr. Allen Pierce?" she asked. "Yes." "You've been served." She handed me a fresh envelope. Inside, a second injunction, filed by Karen Wilkins. Again, same accusations, harassment, disruption, neighborhood misconduct. But this time, she added a new allegation, defamation with intent to dismantle HOA structure. I laughed, but it didn't last. The hearing was scheduled in 4 days. And if she pulled another forged affidavit trick, I'd have to prove, again, that she was a fraud. Only this time, the stakes were higher, because the DA was now watching. She wasn't just trying to stop me. She was trying to save herself. Karen wasn't dumb. Delusional, maybe. Dangerous, absolutely. But dumb? No. This new injunction wasn't about me. It was about optics, about delaying her collapse. If she could portray herself as a real victim, a community leader under attack, it might cast doubt on the criminal charges now looming over her. And it worked for about 30 seconds. Because what she didn't know was that Julia had anticipated this. We knew she'd flail. That's what guilty people do when their masks start slipping. Julia filed an immediate motion to consolidate the new injunction with the existing case. She attached the forensic report, the board testimonies, and digital evidence showing Karen's attempt to rewrite history. But the best part? A new affidavit from Detective Lucero, an investigator from the DA's office. He had already opened the preliminary criminal case. He included a sworn statement outlining the forensic findings, digital file timestamps, and metadata tracing the forged amendment and affidavits back to Karen's home IP address. The court approved our motion. The cases were merged. And now, Karen wasn't facing a homeowner anymore. She was facing the state. But before the next hearing, she made her boldest move yet. One last push to salvage her crumbling rule. It happened at 6:42 a.m. on a Sunday. I heard a rustling sound outside, followed by the snap of plastic and metal. I grabbed my phone and opened the door quietly. Karen, in yoga pants and a hoodie, standing in my driveway, spray painting my garbage bins. She didn't see me right away. Her focus was on the stencils she had taped to my bins, labels reading infraction, non-compliant, and code violation, in bright neon orange. I filmed everything. When she turned and saw me, she didn't flinch. "You think this is over?" she hissed. "You think you won because a judge let you paint your stupid door? You don't know what you've started." "Karen, you're trespassing," I said, calmly holding up my phone, "and vandalizing my property." Her eyes glinted. "I am the HOA. I define what's allowed." "Not anymore," I wanted to say, but I didn't need to, because that same moment, my Ring doorbell camera pinged, and a notification popped up on my screen. Live feed sent to local authorities. Karen's face changed, not out of fear but realization, like someone caught in the act and too far in to turn back. She dropped the spray can and walked off down the street, muttering something I couldn't hear. There's something terrifying about a person who no longer sees consequences, only enemies. Karen had snapped. Her kingdom was burning, and she was tossing gasoline at anything within reach. That same morning, 4 other neighbors found similar graffiti on their bins and fences. Violation, negligence, abuse of power. Her vendetta wasn't just against me anymore. It was against the entire neighborhood. The HOA board issued a temporary suspension. Karen refused to acknowledge it, so the board called an emergency vote to remove her permanently. Flyers were hand-delivered. The vote would be held at the community center the following Thursday. Karen tried to block it, filed a cease and desist, claimed the board had no authority without her signature. But her signature didn't matter anymore, because she wasn't president anymore. Thursday night, community center, standing room only. The room felt like the edge of a revolution. People murmured, exchanged knowing glances. Some whispered updates. Others came to witness the implosion. When Karen entered, silence fell. She wore a power suit again, but the image was hollow. The aura was gone. This wasn't a queen entering court. This was a defendant walking into judgment. Rick Daniels, now acting chair, opened a meeting with a trembling voice, but he stood tall. "Tonight, per HOA bylaw section 9.3, we call for a vote to remove Karen Wilkins as president due to misconduct, fraud, and abuse of authority. All members in good standing may vote." The room exploded in raised hands. The vote? 52 in favor, 3 opposed, 1 abstention. Karen stood in the back, fists clenched at her sides, jaw trembling. Her voice cracked. "You're all fools. I built this neighborhood. Without me, Oakwood falls apart. But it was already falling apart because of her." She stormed out before the final count was announced. The door slammed, and for the first time in years, Oakwood Estates felt still. When people build power from fear, they never see it leaving until it's gone. That night, I finished painting my front door. Midnight anchor, navy blue, bold, clean, defiant. Neighbors came by just to admire it. A few left thank you notes. Some brought wine. One note stood out. No name, just a single sentence, handwritten in blue ink. "You painted more than a door, you cracked the spell." I kept that one, because they were right. But Karen's story wasn't over. The DA was still investigating, and the final chapter, the courtroom reckoning, was coming. Karen Wilkins was suspended from her role as HOA president after vandalizing multiple neighbors' property. Her retaliatory second injunction failed. The community voted overwhelmingly to remove her. The DA opened a criminal case, and I at last painted my front door navy blue. But justice wasn't done yet, because Karen still hadn't faced the one thing she could never intimidate: the law. The higher the pedestal, the louder the fall. The courtroom was smaller than I expected. A pale gray box with heavy wooden benches and a large, arched window behind the judge's bench. The kind of room where you don't just hear the truth, you feel it ripple through the walls. It was early June when Karen's criminal hearing began. 3 felony charges: forgery of legal documents, submission of fraudulent evidence in court, perjury under oath. She was no longer representing the HOA. That title had been stripped away like a tarnished badge. Now, she was just Karen Wilkins, defendant. Her once proud blazer was gone. She wore a conservative black suit this time, with her hair tied back tight. The aura she once carried into HOA meetings, the one that made people cower, was gone. Her eyes darted more than they blinked. At the prosecution table sat Assistant District Attorney Monroe, a man known for his dry tone and brutal efficiency in court. He barely looked at Karen, because he didn't have to. The evidence would speak for itself. This court is now in session. Judge Marcus Rivera presided again. His calm, calculating presence filled the room before he even spoke. He was the same man who had spotted the lies. Now he would judge them in full daylight. State of California versus Karen Wilkins. The clerk announced. Karen stood, barely keeping her composure as the charges were read. Each one carried up to 5 years in prison. She pleaded not guilty, but her voice cracked on the last word. The judge didn't flinch. He ordered both sides to present opening arguments. She lied. She forged. She defrauded not just a neighbor, but the very court that seeks justice. That was Monroe's first sentence. Then he outlined the timeline. The forged HOA amendment, the false affidavits, the digital manipulation, the harassment campaign, the cover-up attempts, the fake meeting minutes, each supported by forensic evidence, witness testimony, and even Karen's own emails. When he sat down, he didn't even glance at the defense table. Because Karen's guilt wasn't just likely, it was proven. Her defense attorney, a new one, this time court-appointed, had little to work with. She acted on behalf of a community she believed was being undermined, he argued. Her actions, though perhaps misguided, were not malicious, only desperate. It was a weak strategy, and Karen knew it. But the real destruction came when the witnesses took the stand. First up, Detective Lucero, the digital forensic specialist. He broke down the data trail, metadata logs, timestamp inconsistencies, source file signatures, all tracing the forged documents to Karen's home network. Next, Rick Daniels, former board member, who calmly stated, Karen told us the amendment was already passed. She said we didn't need to vote, that it had been filed. We trusted her, but she lied. Then came the moment Karen had been dreading. Mark and Diane Johnson, the neighbors whose names she'd forged. Diane's voice trembled. We were on a cruise in Greece when that document was supposedly signed. We never authorized anything. She took our trust and turned it into a weapon. The entire room felt like it was holding its breath. And finally I took the stand. I told the story, start to finish. From a navy blue paint request to the fake violation notices, to the moment Karen stood on my driveway, spray painting my bins in a fit of delusion. But I didn't make it about paint. I made it about principle. This wasn't about color. It was about control. Karen used her position to bend the truth, to bully, to punish anyone who didn't submit. And when I pushed back, she tried to ruin me. But the worst part? She used the law, our legal system, as a weapon. That's not just HOA overreach. That's criminal. I stepped down. The silence afterward was heavy. Final. Does the defense wish to call the defendant? Karen's attorney stood and looked at her. She hesitated, then stood, and for a moment she looked like she might confess. I've only ever wanted what's best for Oakwood, she began. I gave years of my life to that neighborhood. I tried to keep it safe, clean, respectable. But, she paused. The courtroom leaned in. Then her tone shifted. Hard. But I was attacked, undermined, turned into a villain by people who didn't understand the burden of leadership. I made decisions that not everyone liked. But I never intended to break the law. The sympathy in the room evaporated like steam. Because she still couldn't admit what she'd done. Not really. The law doesn't care about intention. It cares about truth. Closing arguments were swift. Monroe didn't embellish. She forged signatures. She submitted them to a court. She created fake laws and wielded them like a sword. That is not governance. That is criminal conduct. The jury was dismissed to deliberate. It took them 43 minutes. When they returned, no one looked at Karen. On all 3 felony charges, the foreman said, "We find defendant guilty." Karen didn't cry. She didn't shout. She just sat down, slowly, like her bones had gone soft. Sentencing came 2 weeks later. The courtroom was full, but Karen's bench was nearly empty. No supporters. No neighbors. No board members. Only silence. Judge Rivera looked directly at her before delivering his final statement. Ms. Wilkins, you were entrusted with the authority to lead. Instead, you forged, falsified, and betrayed that trust. You didn't just violate laws. You violated the very foundation of community. You abused your position to wage a personal war, and for that, this court sees no room for leniency. He paused. Then, you are hereby sentenced to 28 months in state prison, with probation following and restitution to be paid to affected parties. The gavel struck. Karen's shoulders slumped. The bailiff led her away in handcuffs. No words. No final scream. Just a shuffle of feet on polished floorboards. And just like that, Oakwood's tyrant was gone. Neighbors cheered in quiet ways. Rick Daniels was elected the new board president, reluctantly, but with newfound humility. Julia declined all legal fees after the case, saying it was worth it to watch justice unfold. And me? I bought a second can of Midnight Anchor. Painted the back door this time, just because I could. But the most powerful moment came a month later. At the community picnic, a neighbor I barely knew came up to me and said, "It wasn't about the door, was it?" I smiled. No, it was about the key.